man down, well, then I'll go up. I'm a-coming under your blades, your cameras and searchlights. I'll dance the beat of music, death. Witness me, oh Lord, Judge, oh Father, and little brother. I will be heard!
Hello? Hey, Brad, it's night now. Real sudden. Brad, I don't know if you can hear this, but one of the elevators is coming down from the 93rd floor. Now 75. 65. The elevator's at 30. 10. 9. 8. It's empty, but there's this glow inside. Well, I guess that makes as much sense as anything else in this situation, but it's like the elevator's beckoning. So, all right. Okay. Brad, I'm going in.
I'm on top of the world! Night wind, come on, come blow me into my life. This is the... Yeah, y'all take a good look. Get a full close-up of me. Presley the first, Jesse Garon, Jesse G, the only goddamn Presley. There are problems in these times, but woo, none of them are mine. Oh, baby, I'm beginning to see the light.
Hey, step away from the edge!
I'm coming to get you, little brother, and nothing can stop me.
Sheriff Ray arrives on the roof a beat too late to see Jesse the Shadowborn jump from the roof. Running to the edge, Ray sees no falling man. The searchlights pick up no broken body. Jesse has passed mid-step from the consciousness of one split moment into another, to land in...
Okay.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. I ended that a little early, but I get the thumbs up from David, so I think we're good to go. Just a moment. Good evening. Good evening and welcome to the 2021 Here Now Audio Fiction and Arts Festival Virtual Edition and our panel this evening, Production Budgets for Audio Fiction. My name is Tony Brewer and I'm president of the National Audio Theater Festivals, producers of this 9th Here Now Festival, and I wanted to take a minute to thank our festival sponsors, Missouri Arts Council and Radio Drama Network, also sponsors Sound Booth Theater, sponsors of Pandemic Through the Ages, Midsummer Sound Company, and Tom Dukeman sponsoring Between Americans, Earplay, and Writers Guild at Bloomington sponsoring Urban Deer. Also wanted to thank these folks for their in-kind support, the Media School at Indiana University, SAG-AFTRA, Monroe County Civic Theater of Indiana, Whisper Room Incorporated, Sennheiser, and Podium Audio. Thanks so much for being here, and we hope you enjoy the rest of the festival. For this panel, if you have questions, please follow the link in the chat and submit them in the Google form. It's a little easier for us to keep track of them that way. Now let me turn over to our panelists, Casey Whalen and Jude Kampfer.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hope you all are having a wonderful Saturday so far. We're here to talk about budgets. Yay! The most fun part of any production, right?
Tony, can we see our participants?
Excuse me, I cannot turn on their video. I can only ask them to unmute themselves. So,
Oh, now they're popping on. Oh,
there
hey, cool.
we go.
Now we can see a few friendly faces. Good to see Mike, Brett, Seth, and Jason, and Josh. Good to see you all here. It's nice to, and there's Bonnie. Hello, Bonnie. Good to see you again. It's nice to have, like, I have taught during the pandemic, and so talking to the black boxes does get a little dry after a while.
Right.
So
I agree. I really wanted to see people.
it's good to see all your shiny faces here, and welcome to talk about budgets. Where, yeah, like I was saying, it's one of these things. It's the grease that makes the wheels spin, and so Jude and I have collaborated our thoughts a bit to give you some heads up, talk a little bit about some things to look out for, and just kind of give you the 411 of what we can about how to deal with this kind of budgetary constraints.
I guess Casey doesn't need any introduction, right? Or do you think you do?
Sure. I mean, we could introduce ourselves. Sure. I mean, if you want, I'll go first because I've been talking a little while. My name is Casey Whalen. I'm a writer, director, and producer of a lot of audio fiction here in Southern California. I have done We're Alive, Bronzeville, multitude of other productions, some stuff coming out from Audible next month. And so I've sort of bounced around and played with a lot of different people to produce this kind of stuff. And Jude?
Yeah, my name's Jude Kampfner. The audio drama I've done started in Australia with the ABC and then with the BBC, pretty solidly from 2005 to 2018. And now I am coaching, but still listen to a lot, and still I'm coaching some people to do audio drama production. So I've still got my foot in. What you heard just now was something called Shadowbarn. Steve Erickson, you might know his writing, but it is kind of science fiction fantasy. And this is actually appropriate because it's set in 9/11 this year. And the conceit is that on that date, the Twin Towers arise from the earth in South Dakota. And all kinds of sounds are coming off it. And 500,000 people show up to look at it, and everybody's hearing different sounds. And it goes quite mad. And so just to sort of explain the bit that you heard, a sheriff enters and she finds it pristine. Like there was no indication that they collapsed at all. They were super clean, super beautiful. And in the boardroom, Jesse Presley wakes up. And Jesse Presley was the stillborn twin brother of Elvis. And the presumption in this play is Elvis dies and Jesse lives. But Jesse's very, very angry because he knows that Elvis would have been a lot more famous than him. And so he jumps off the roof into another world, which is 60s Andy Warhol's New York. And then he goes on a rampage of New York trying to get rid of all of Elvis's records. Anyway, there's a lot of music in it. I mean, obviously, there's Elvis's music, and there's a CD a 45 that Elvis never made, and we had to recreate that. We had to get an Elvis impersonator to try and sing this imaginary song, and the main thing is there's a brother and sister who are driving from LA to try to get to South Dakota, and they play a cassette, and their father, who died, was a DJ, and he's playing songs to give them messages. So
pretty complex production. Lots of little line items in there from a budgetary standpoint.
Right. Complex, but a set budget. No negotiation possible. So could we start, Tony, with the deck? And if you don't mind, yeah, okay, so we'll start with this. So I can give you the dollar amounts, which I think you would need to know. But just to kind of go through quite quickly, most productions, in my case, every production needs an exec producer and doesn't charge very much. In dollars, it's 348. That producer has to sign off, has to QC it, and also do the compliance check. The legal issue is very, very important, and only there's a kind of list of people that you can use who've been approved. Director, I'm often the director and the producer. There are some times when I will hire in a director. And that director would earn $1,390. So not very much.
Is that per day? That's per production?
That's for 2 days,
Okay.
or 1.5, depending on how soon we finish. The big budget issue is the writer. The Writers Guild in England is very, very strong. The writers are paid per minute of broadcast, and you cannot deviate from that. And there's a kind of like rota of starting writers to growing writers. And once they've got the really established writer amount, you cannot give them less. So roughly 1/3 of the whole budget goes to the writer, and you're stuck with that. So there are ways of getting around it, as I'll explain later on. But so the writer's fee is $8,340. I am budgeting this on a 45-minute show.
Now, this also, just to piggyback, U.S. rules are different for writers because the Writers Guild for East and West Writers Guild don't actually have a set amount that they have to be paid for, and they're also not technically signatory productions yet for the Writers Guild. So a lot of that is kind of negotiable in the U.S. But typically, I've seen it anywhere. This production here, what was the U.S. amount that you said it was on?
For the writer, $8,340.
Yeah, for a 45-minute production. U.S., I've typically seen anywhere from $2,500 to $4,000 a script. That's about the same length-ish that comes out. So we'll have a little translation, I think, here across the board for some of the U.S. stuff.
So basically, Casey, we're saying that the writer's amount's about the same, correct?
Yeah, maybe. Well, I mean, if that's 8,000 U.S., if that translates, it comes out to about maybe half that for here, because we don't have to have that the union, but it can get more depending on who you get attached as a writer. But that's a straight writer's fee. That's not any licensing fees if you're doing something that's, say, based on a pre-existing work, which that is totally negotiable.
I find that if I have a writer who's American, I usually have to pay them more because they're usually with William Morris Entertainment, as Steve Erickson was, and they think it's equivalent to film, and you have to really fight them, and it gets really nasty because those agents are like bulldogs. And Steve Erickson charged quite a lot, and then I had to get an adapter. So with that was with the one you heard, not the one that we're talking about. So I'm saying that sometimes a writer's super expensive. And when you've got a writer of a book or another derivative and someone who adapts it, you've got to pay double. I mean, 2 people. The adapter is often pretty expensive too. The Writers Guild adaptation is just a little bit below original work. So actors are not that expensive in the UK. If I had 6 actors for this, it would be $5,000.
And what does that break down per actor?
It depends on stars and other people, but a star would get roughly $800 a day, but the second day is half that. Because the idea is they've kind of broken the back of it in the first day. Do you want to say how that compares with you?
Sure. So the U.S. is a little bit different, and it's a little bit more variable, but depending if you're using SAG actors or not. The union has a set guideline depending on what sort of signatory you become. Signatory process for the Screen Actors Guild is really, and they cover also new media and radio stuff now. They sort of merged with AFTRA a couple of years ago. But typically, a standard actor is about like $350 for a 4-hour session. and then it can get a little bit more depending on if you do an 8-hour day. It adds in an eighth of their base pay for each additional hour over. That's the current set contract rate. But then again, the sky's the limit depending on if you have big name actors. Like I have seen some get as high as $15,000 a day, depending on who you're getting attached. And then if you're using SAG, you also have to pay pension and welfare, which is about 18%, depending on what signatory you're under, to pay into their pension and welfare. That is union work. Non-union, the lowest you can go is minimum wage in the U.S., which is currently, I don't recommend going below 15 an hour in general for that.
Right. So I'm not kind of going specifically through this because I think the way that we're team talking is better to go with the most important things first. The studio fee for the recording studio is $1,500 a day, $1,500 you call it, right? Casey, do you want to say anything?
Yeah, so that, I mean, it really depends on the location. I've seen some that you can get down to like 500 a day, even around that time. But I've also seen some that go as high as 3,500 a day. And sometimes they'll add in their engineer cost on top of that, depending on it's like an hourly rate, where they'll be like, oh, hey, it's an hourly rate on top of that for the engineer, $50 an hour for them. So it really depends also on the size of the studio. If you're getting a real small couple booths, if you're doing a multicast recording that has to have a decent amount for your for cast size, then it just goes up from there. And also depends on the quality of the studio. But I will say that sometimes you end up paying for it in the end, because if you get a good studio that's nice and quiet, that you can do all these things and not have a lot of interruptions, then you'll be able to produce very smoothly. If you're at a place that has a lot of extra noise, holding for planes, cars, dogs, that adds a lot of extra time and also frustration for your actors.
I agree. The one time I tried to really save, there was a buzz on the tape.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's you get what you pay for sometimes. It's good to test early and really see what you are getting.
right.
Jude, I wanted to ask, because we had a pertinent question. Brett Weaver asked, if there are multiple writers, is that writer's fee split up?
I've never had multiple writers. I mean, an adapter and a writer is the multiple list I've gone. What about Casey?
It really depends. I mean, for our side, it's pretty much negotiable. You can split a fee depending if the writers are willing to do that. And then you can depend on like the percentage from there. Like if you have like an assistant writer, sometimes it's a flat fee. Like I've had a writing assistant before who is basically going over, doing checks on characters. They'll maybe add in a line or here or there. And you can pay them a flat fee of depending on what it is that they're going to be, needing to contribute. So it depends. Sometimes like the writer could get like maybe 10,000 for the writing all the scripts, and then assistant writer could be like 1,500 to 2,500 ish.
So going back to the studio, Casey, your studio has a recording engineer for that price, right?
Yeah, so it can get included in that rate. So the last studio that I rented, which was a very large studio, in fact, it was about, I want to say almost like 1,700 square feet. The studio was pretty large, and including the booth, and that was 10,000 for I think 5 days. So equivalents about 2,000 a day, roughly.
Right. You can do a dry hire where you have the studio and you bring in your own engineer. I do that if the engineer is going to do the post, because then they have like a lot more knowledge when they go into post. But most of my people split and they see the jobs as very, very different. So the recording engineer doesn't want to post produce and vice versa. So but
Also,
the dry hire will be cheaper because you're bringing your own person in, but you've still got to pay that person. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, also something to consider too is a lot of studios, especially here in California, they won't allow you to bring in your own engineer because the studios are so tailored to specific specs and like how you basically plug in a cable and get into the system. A lot of people are like, no, don't touch our systems. We don't want to have to deal with somebody messing with our settings or, not knowing what they're doing at the preamps.
Right. That makes sense. And maybe also liability.
Yeah, that's a big thing.
Yeah. Right. A large studio or a large-ish studio is important to me because I want my actors to really move. I don't want them to stand. And I like them to, like, even for a circus production, I got them to do cartwheels, and we were miking them doing cartwheels. So I like space. So, I'm prepared to pay a bit more for the space. And if I'm doing a narrator, I'll have them separately going to a much smaller, like an audiobook cubicle studio. That also helps because I think narration is very, very different and needs a lot more concentrated time. I think it's a really important skill.
Also, it saves your budget a lot not to have people standing around, actors just being like, well, we got to wait for them to finish recording. So optimizing your schedule is a great way to optimize your budget.
Right. Exactly. I mean, scheduling is hugely important, and I don't think many people record chronologically through the play anymore.
No, it doesn't make sense to, because you just, you pair up what scenes those characters are in, and you'll save oodles amount of time. Like the production I was just on was 10 episodes, and there is two characters back to back. We just put those two characters on one day. They have like 3 episodes of material, knocked it all out, and then that other character was done. And then we just brought in other characters, and that way you're not paying people to sit around and they feel like their time is more valued.
And sometimes for your stars, you just drop in lines later, because sometimes I think it's embarrassing for stars to work with like much less sophisticated actors. So I like to kind of like screen them, kind of cosset them. They do their stuff and then they go away.
Yeah, some of those drop-ins, like if you have like a diner waitress or something, really, if they have like a 1 or 2 line, get those later. And then that way they're much cheaper and easier for pickups.
Yeah, and that's also true of children. I do children separately and drop them in.
Unless your entire cast is children, and then you're just stuck.
But I don't believe in not using children. I think children are fantastic. And
Oh, yeah.
change the acoustic and change the vibe.
It gives you dynamics.
Yeah.
Much more rich dynamics.
Right. So the post-production, I try and do flat rate, and I try and work with, I have about 3 people that I really like. And I think it's really important to collaborate with your engineer. I really like to have their views on things. In fact, I often think I want them to be like very engaged, and to suggest things and to start planning before we go in together. So I try and do it for like between 1,000 to 2,000 for a flat fee.
I tend to pay a little more. My sound designers, I rely a lot to do like going back and do Foley work and like the voice cutting stage. And my expectations of our post teams are, I think, fairly high. Also, what we do with ours is we slightly split them out a little bit to where we'll have a dedicated team that's doing vocal cuts, and then we'll have a dedicated team who's doing sound design, because sometimes editing voices and being able to know pacing and be able to do all that stuff takes a lot of time and has a different skill set sometimes than somebody who's concentrating on sound. So sometimes splitting them out. But in general, I'd say about for a 45-minute production like this, budgeting from $2,000 to $4,000 an episode, I think is a good estimate. Especially, and a flat rate's best because sometimes episodes take a lot longer than you think, and if you're paying per hour, it's going to get costly.
Okay, so producer, I say the producer works for 7 days. It's actually more, but that's all I can really budget for. And I say it's £500 a day, which comes out to, if the 7 days at £500, the dollar amount is $4,855.
So about 4,000 an episode ish. That's pretty good. That's a good rate. That's about like 4,500 is about, if you're doing like a major production with, you're dealing with a lot of casting, a lot of talent, a lot of post production, and you're the producer who has to make sure it goes through the entire process. That's a pretty good rate.
Okay, so we're going to talk quite a lot about miscellaneous expenses later on, but if we just scroll up a minute, Tony, you can see here that there are quite a few. There's a writer's attendance fee, which you have to pay in the UK. It's about $200. Then there's hospitality, kit hire. We've talked about the recording SM, photography, the travel for people. Sometimes accommodation, like in the UK, if they're in London and they come from the north, you've got to pay for a night's accommodation. It's very, very good to have a contingency for those things because you don't really know what might happen.
Yeah, a 10% contingency is always a good buffer because you never know. I mean, you'll have stuff come up out of the blue, especially with dealing with different actors, and yeah, it's anything last minute. You have to make sure you can cover it, otherwise it comes out of your pocket.
Yeah. Okay, so can we go to the pitch deck? Okay, so Tony, is it okay if I just say next as we move on, and Casey just interrupt? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's very obvious, and as the two of us have shown, very different and different priorities. So next. Yeah. So I have a fixed budget, and I think it really helps to have one because I think it's very, very suspicious if you're working for a client and they don't give you a budget. That at any point then they can say, you've gone over budget, you haven't produced enough or whatever, and you didn't know what it was. So I think it really gives you guidelines to know the budget. With me, I can't really negotiate. There's no wiggle room. Even like foreign travel, they won't pay. So you've got to budget for it and economize elsewhere. Next. Yeah. So really, really think about it at the very beginning of the whole process. And I know it's hard, but stick to it. And if you find you're going slightly over, then you've got to cut back. Sorry.
I was going to say, also find out what your deliverable requirements are when you're working with somebody. Like if you're working with Audible, you're working with BBC, they will give you a list of what their expectations are for your production. Sometimes they'll put things in there that you don't need, or sometimes you'll need to include them that you didn't consider. Some of them being like legal checks or artwork or things like that. You never know what might be added on. So usually ask if you're working with any of these big partners.
There was quite a push a little while ago for celebrities. But the great thing for the BBC is celebrities don't actually charge more than other people because they enjoy it and they get to meet their friends and they sit around and chat and swap stories about other theatre productions that they've been in. So for somebody, for instance, like Rosamund Pike, who was in a production of mine, she was the same. It was like £600 a day, roughly $800. And the three leads were exactly the same. So the film star was the same. Okay, next.
Not always the case in the US.
Okay. Right. So how flexible is the client? I'm saying mine isn't. The story, what shape is it in? What might you have to do? I've had to fire a writer twice and then sort of co-write it with somebody else. One was a New York Times journalist, and she'd written a verbatim play using, news transcripts, but she couldn't do anything else. And she assured me she could. So we had to get rid of her and in the last kind of month write it ourselves. So the celebrities we've talked about, and then the crew, if you have a team, I think it really helps. It helps save time. And you've got similar views as to how you're going to do things. And then the timeline, it's important too. Like, do you have a writer who hasn't got time to write it until 6 months? In that case, you can't have, your deadline has to be accordingly. Okay, next. Right, so I'm interested in what Casey often thinks is his most noteworthy ingredient. For me, a topical subject is. What do you think?
I think it's a dynamic story. I mean, regardless of where it comes from, I mean, it's interesting because you can get something that has a really great baseline story with really amazing characters and is trying to tell something in an engaging way. And that's usually the story is the biggest thing, that if you don't have a good story, you're not gonna be able to, the rest is not gonna matter.
Absolutely.
Because I've seen so many productions where they'll strap on a big name, and that big name won't do anything with the production. It won't enhance it anyway, because you're starting with something that's, not great.
So these are some of the examples of what you might like. You might find a lost screenplay that Bela Lugosi was in. I worked with Steppenwolf Theatre Company in Chicago. That was a key thing for me. It was a real plus. And I had to work within their guidelines. Topical subject, I did a play about drone pilots, and the BBC said, we're only ever going to do one play about drone pilots, so it better be bloody good. Actor out of retirement, Glenda Jackson, I don't know if you've heard of her, but she was brought to do a Zola story. She's 80-something, she showed up early, and she was brilliant. Training new talent, that's what some companies like to do. They like to have kind of workshops on the go and bring new talent in. That's a saving. And some people like to work with students. Okay, next.
We did have a question come in from Brett. Is it safe to say, Jude, that most of your products work with the BBC?
Yeah.
And the follow-up question for me was on my end is where is my stuff aired? I'm kind of like all over the place. I'll work with Audible, which will have kind of a set budget, but then I'll also do independent work. I'll also work with subcontracting through iHeart, Spotify, and even DAX and other companies who are sometimes they're film production companies who want to option something later on, and so they'll come up with a budget to produce it in the audio space. So it's a little different. And every single budget that I work with has different constraints and different things to look at. And sometimes you don't have as many considerations as others might do. Like Audible has different requirements for legal clearances, and say like the last production I worked on didn't have any. They were like, good, script awesome, move on. But like Audible, they're like, no, you have to actually have the script read by somebody and give it an approval before you move to the next process.
That's like my exec, same thing.
Yeah.
Right. I've done a branded audio drama. Not a good idea. Then you're dealing with the advertising company, and then another agent, and then the client, and so many different layers. It's really hard. So if you use a totally out of copyright text, you can save, but absolutely check that it is out of copyright. And if it's a foreign language translation, check that the translation is out of copyright. Okay. So this is exactly what Casey said, the best possible script. And I've given you 2 examples of people in the UK who make their entire living writing audio drama and make good money, and are in such demand that really it's about like a year in advance. And they might not want to work with you. Okay.
Oh, we did have a question that was pretty relevant. Brian was asking, what methods do you use to gauge your personal rates? Years of experience? Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's also, you look at the previous productions that you've worked on and how much you charge to them, and you can use that sort of as a base rate. It's and what you're willing to work for. But then there's sometimes you'll work on a passion project. You're like, I love this. I'm willing to work at a lower rate for something like this, just to have the experience and also to start a relationship working with these people. Because that's the great thing about this industry, is that if you're successful and something works and they like working with you, people will work with you again. And so sometimes it's also about building that relationship.
The BBC have day rates, and so I asked for the top, which is $800 a day, but I end up doing more days than I budget for. Okay, so this woman was the woman that dramatized Shadowbound, and she had to distill a 100,000 word novel into 7,500 words. It was an enormous feat, and she did it extremely well, and the writer really liked it. So adaptations are her thing. She's done over 60, and sometimes she gets more scope to do things like Conrad's Heart of Darkness, she changed the hero to be a heroine, and she made it very updated so that instead of going into this Heart of Africa that was in his day, there are people that are doing kind of illegal oil drilling. Okay. Yeah, docudrama, you can save money because you can use court transcripts. You can do verbatim stuff from news reports. You can go out and record stuff as it's happening. But it's a hard thing to pull off, I think. What do you think, Casey?
It really depends on the source material. Like I'm actually doing something similar about a Murta true crime. So true crime is like one of the hottest industries in the podcast and audio narratives because people love to listen about true stories. And if there's a way you can dramatize them or make them more enhanced, finding source material, adding sound effects base, doing musical cues, doing even sound effects recreations, where it's like we're doing this on a current production that I'm working on called Pink Moon Murders, where they're recreating the murder sequences, like going into the trailers, walking through something at night, hearing as if you were inside the scenes themselves, and you don't really have to do as many actors with that. You can do sound effects bases. So it really depends on the subject matter. If you have something that's worthwhile, that kind of works within its own world of audio.
What about paying lawyers? If it's
that gets tricky because you do want to have somebody, because whenever you're dealing with anything that is possibly true, there is something called errors and omission insurance, E&O insurance, that you might need to get, especially in the US, where if you're portraying something falsely, you could be liable. So fiction is safer in that area, whereas docudrama might be cheaper. There is something that is possible to happen. Not to say you always have to worry about it, but it's there. There is a risk factor.
Can you give an indication of the E&O that you might be using for a crime?
So it's sort of like it's errors and omission, meaning that you say something wrong or say something wrong about somebody. And sometimes the insurance can be like maybe $10,000 for a production or something like that. So it can get costly very quickly.
So that's more than my writer.
Yeah. No, there is a production I'm working on that's going through a lot of the clearances and stuff. I'm not joking. The insurance is it's a hefty production, but the insurance is almost $20,000 just for insurances.
Wow. Okay, next. Okay, so auditions. Can we just go back? Sorry. Auditions are important. With stars, you can't audition them. They absolutely refuse. You're supposed to know their work. I like to do them in person where possible, because I think you get much more of a sense of the personality and whether you can work with them. But you can also go onto YouTube and watch videos that they've done. You can go onto their agent sites and listen to their voice reels. And sometimes I phone them up. And that's a good thing too. But you can get a bit muddled, who said what. I do record them and I tell them that. But to put a face to the voice really helps me. For that Shadow Barn, I wanted an Ethiopian actress because that's who she is in the play. And I was prepared to do any kind of African accent. And the very last person on the phone was Ethiopian, and she was good. So that was lucky. So, keep going, I think. It can be very frustrating, the auditions. But I find paying for a rehearsal room to audition in New York is not expensive, about $30 an hour. So it's your time, basically, but I think it's time well spent.
Yeah, more and more, depending on if you go with like a casting agent, like that's something that I budget for as a casting agent, because you get more auditions that way. And nowadays, so many people are doing video submission auditions, and I've gone through like in a couple days thousands of auditions, just because you can hear very quickly and you see the videos and go, okay, no, that person's not going to be a good fit for the role, and you can get through more that way rather than then do the in-person or a callback later. That way you can find out who actually can take direction well and who can change their performances.
Yeah. The only time I used a casting agent was 2000, and they sent me real duds. So I didn't want to do that again.
Yeah, if you're budgeting it, casting ages could be anywhere from 1,500 to 2,500, depending on how many roles you're doing and who you're going through. But I find it invaluable because honestly, casting can save a lot of issues later on. You spend more time casting, you'll spend less time directing.
Have you fired an actor on set?
No. I fired him afterwards, and I've replaced their voice because it just didn't fit. But I haven't run into. Usually, the casting process is a nice filtration of anything that might be problematic.
I had to once. I was doing 2 plays in rep, so I had the same cast for both plays, and I realized that he couldn't do the second play. It was too difficult for him. So, like midway through, I got rid of him and I got somebody else to drop in those lines. You just got to be kind of ruthless about it.
Yeah.
I mean, you pay them.
It's the sake of the production.
Yeah.
If somebody's just not working, like this one person I cut, the voice brought down the production, and I had to say, no, this just doesn't work. It just doesn't work.
I've also cut people out completely.
Yeah.
Like I had a flower seller who said she could do a Cockney accent, and she was a star, so I couldn't audition her, and she couldn't.
Yeah.
So I just used some of her grunts and had no voice from her at all, and just cut the scene right down.
It's sad, but you have to do it. Sake of the production.
Right. So next. Yeah, so a casting plan, I don't know, Casey, if you do this, but when you're going for a star, it's quite important, and you go to their agents and you get an avail. That's what they call them in England. Are they available? You're not going to hire them yet, but you want to know if they're available. And then you want a kind of like, in theory, is, in this case, she interested? And then you want to at some point say, is she interested or not? You've really got to let us know.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they're hanging on, like might they get something else? And then you move down your list of favorites. So with us, Rosamund Pike was 3rd choice. So
Yeah.
like, put chaste. This is the production assistant.
Yeah, we did the same thing with we did a project recently that's coming out next month. Same way, you put a priority list out, and then it's a lot of sometimes people availability. Like we were trying to get somebody who is like, you know, the people like talent go all over the world, so a lot of time they're just not available.
Yeah. Okay, next. Okay, this was our child actor who we dropped in. We recorded him in New York and then used the tape in our London recording session, and he's meeting the actor and the writer of the book, The Hours. The writer wants to come in and see him, so that was okay. Next one. Yeah, so these are the 2 people in Shadowbarn, the Ethiopian and her brother, and this was how it was in the book. It was a black sister of a white brother, different parents. And it's interesting because I was telling Casey, like, I really believe in lunch, and these 2 were not getting on in the morning. We did recording in a car because of their car trip, and we took the car to a Queens quiet street. Again, like there's a problem with that. There was a school bus training session. They were learning to back the bus. I was like, in a quiet street, we looked for the most quiet street. So we had to like move on a bit. But I don't have a car. New Yorkers often don't. So I had to hire somebody, a friend, a car, and them. So you pay a little token amount for that. But we had them in the car very close together. They didn't like that. They didn't like that at the beginning. And then after lunch, they found something in common, like their mothers died of the same illness or something, truly. And then they were fine. Okay, next. Yeah, so sometimes we get, if the person doing the design, the sound design, might not have the sounds we need, we'll get somebody to go and gather the sounds, if they're very prescriptive, before. Okay. So a composer. This is a guy I know very, very well. He's really great. He does film work and he charges tons, but for me, he charges 1,000. And that's because we use his backlist. So in this case, I said Gene is called Yevgeny, but we call him Gene. I found a Schumann theme. Could you make it into 50s record music and lounge music of the 90s? And could you transcribe the orchestral theme on piano and play it yourself? And so we did lots of different versions of that theme, and it was $1,000.
Yeah, mine tends to be a lot higher. I've done orchestration and composing all the way up to like $9,000, $10,000, $12,000 for productions. Because one of the ways that we do our workflow is we want custom scores, a lot of custom scores where it's created for exactly that scene, for those music bridges, to create leitmotifs for the characters or certain things that are happening. Because I feel like you can do a lot of storytelling inside the sound design, but you have to also plan it out ahead of time, and you know, you have to pay for it too.
And you use music for underscoring, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you put like chapter bridges.
Yeah, chapter bridges, introduction, theme songs, but also inside the scenes, depending on the production.
Yeah, and sometimes the composer can do sound effects. Something in the music can be a sound effect.
Yeah, like with Bronzeville, there's a couple sections where like they're in a knife fight, and when he swipes the knife, the music swipes with him, and things like that to really accent what's happening in the action.
That's terrific. Okay, next. Maybe there. Okay, that's her, and I talked about Rosamund's not asking for a lot of money, but I shouldn't really say this, but there was a lot of like cosseting that had to go on. Next. Okay, so these were two people in a play about health insurance. I said I like topical ideas. I commissioned it. This young playwright, I didn't have to pay him so much, so a bit of a saving there. And this is just to say that I record roughly 20 minutes of product every day. And so for 45 minutes, it's roughly 2 days. Sometimes I can get it done earlier than that. And then my post is roughly 4 days.
Mine is a lot longer. Mine takes months. We'll spend a lot of time in the post-production process, and re-recording studio doing Foley and such. But you have to pay for that.
But Casey, would you have them like, because this is her mum who was sick and the health insurance was the problem, that's the son. Would you like have them in kind of situ a bit?
What did you mean by that? I
mean, like she's lying down, he's by her bedside. In other words, they're not standing up and they're not at lecterns.
Oh, I actually put everybody in the same space and just do sort of a black box. So they're either just in front of a microphone and they have to do it, and then our sound design team will then recreate everything afterwards. Okay. Just a preference and style, just for time. Just because a lot of places you don't really have the time to do that kind of setup.
There's a place called Soundhouse in London where they will distinguish rooms. So the kitchen sound in a living room and outdoors, and they have a wind tunnel. So that's great, but it's kind of a bit old-fashioned.
Yeah, I always find that, like, when you have voices, the voice actors aren't always the best physical actors for sound effects, and I like them being close, and then you can figure out most in post.
Right. I mean, I felt for this, it really helped. Her voice kind of changed. And I find props often help. Like a blanket for a baby, the woman's voice changes immediately.
Yeah. Well, like there was an instance where somebody's crawling on the ground where I had them get on the ground for that. If it affects their diaphragm, that's when they're doing it. If there's a physicality, they need that sort of resistance.
That one we heard at the beginning, it was Patch Dara, and he ran upstairs because the recording studio was in a big building. So we went up the stairs and got him really, really out of breath, which is what he's
Yeah, no, that kind of stuff, you can't, it's hard to fake sometimes.
Yeah. Okay. Rosamund wanted green apples for her saliva. So, and she's right. But I think it's very important to ask beforehand, ask the agent, what does the person need? What do they like? Do they have any dietary requirements for lunch? That kind of thing. Allergies,
big thing.
Right. Okay. So this is the lunch, and I pay for lunch, and I like them not to leave the building for lunch because sometimes they don't come back on time, and that's really awful. But as I said, I think they also bombed. Usually the production assistant takes orders and a local place delivers. Okay, next.
Yeah, it's always good to budget in craft services, whether it's like just lunch or also snacks. You know, a well-fed cast is a happy cast.
Right. Sometimes with children, I give them tea and cupcakes.
Actors get hangry.
Right. So document your show in the progress of it, because that helps on social media. The BBC have a rule: do not have a microphone in the photograph. Boring, boring, boring. That's what they say. So here we staged it. Not very well. This was about a woman games designer. It wasn't great, but it gave us an idea of what the cast, their age, and the look of her was important. I think she really embodied the role. Okay.
Yeah, Audible specifically has like a get people behind the microphone. So it really depends on who you're delivering to.
Right. So this is one of my favorite sound designers. Okay, next. Okay, this is the end. So these are the additional costs. So Casey, do you want to talk about those?
Yeah, so here's a couple things. You see some of them on the list there. You know, obviously putting in your contingencies, but a couple other things I'll add in here just to keep an eye out for is printed materials. Like if you are dealing with a gigantic recording, like this is just one of the recordings that I did recently, and you can see it's a lot of pages. And if you imagine you had to pay for printing on that, you know, for all the actors, depending on how many pages they're on, and also one-sided, that way they're not doing this, you know, page turning thing, that can get a little expensive, you know, binding, printing, all that stuff. So it is something to accommodate and think about. Additional clearances and licenses, like if you're doing insurance, that's something you have to make sure you put inside of your production. If you're trying to license any music, good luck if it's pre-existing, because podcasts or whatever you're doing are downloadable and streamable. It's this weird legal gray area sometimes for music. So if it's a pre-existing song, that can get really costly, up to $10,000 a license on a song, if not more, depending on who you're trying to get. Sound effects libraries. So if you want to get something specific for your production, like I have a Western coming up that I got some horse stuff for, sound effects libraries are sometimes good, and you can cut some corners for production there. Marketing material, you know, we saw an earlier slide, you know, video photography, still photography, all that stuff is incidentals that you can sometimes deal with. Also in the day of COVID, COVID testing protocols. If you're working with SAG actors, they have to be COVID tested if they're going to have any in-person interactions.
I saw in your budget 5,000.
Yes.
We test 30 actors.
Yeah, so if you have to test, I mean, each test can be $170, and if you have to test every 2 days, which is current SAG standards, plus also have a COVID compliancy officer on set, those go up really quickly. And to leeway into one of the questions that was brought up with COVID and the new advancements, do you consider actors with home studios and Source Connect? Yes and no. It's sometimes great for pickups for people to be able to read in there and just give their voice. If it's really small, but if it's really intimate 2-person scenes with a lot of drama back and forth, I still prefer putting my people inside of a controlled location where I can direct them and have them, you know, be like they're in the same space. Because unfortunately, when you start adding in everyone's location, I mean, you're dealing with how noisy LA is. You know, roommates, you know, automobiles, planes, helicopters, and then you have to remove all that. And sometimes it's just easier and more cost efficient to just get it in a studio. Another question that was actually come in was, do you ever create a character for a voice actor you loved that didn't fit the role into it well enough? Yeah, I mean, it really depends, I think, on the production. I've actually done materials for characters that I really enjoy. Did a whole production around it. Jude, this is a question for you. Do you have any time constraints per session for BBC?
Nope. It's up to me. I mean, I get a set budget and I have to deliver, and only the compliance person listens. So it's up to me how I allocate it.
There are some restrictions depending on voiceover talent for SAG. can't go past 12 hours. Absolutely not. I mean, but if you're also using your voice talent for over 8 hours, that's a lot of strain on a voice, and you might lose it or strain it in a way that's not very, productive, especially if you're doing multiple days. So
There is
something to keep an eye out for.
a minimum call for actors 4 hours, and you might not use all 4. Do you have that?
Yes, that there are minimums sometimes for that. It really depends. If you're doing a non-union production, you can do what you want. Non-union is kind of the Wild West in some ways.
Oh yeah, there is that slide. Like, if you can have a little cast party at the end, especially if you're doing repertory stuff, like I did 3 plays about Russia with the same cast. We got to know each other really well. Yeah, we went to a burlesque show at the end.
Why not? Another thing also to think about, just looking at my little incidentals list of things to throw out there, is social media management. If you are your own production, sometimes incorporating that in your own production. Sometimes they won't do it. Sometimes they will. Hard drives, data storage, backups, that kind of thing. Incidentals, little additional things like that can end up eating up a lot. And sometimes legal consultation, whether getting your scripts approved, your talent contracts approved, anything like that. So, I think that covers it.
Yeah, but you had a little audio you wanted to play.
We don't have time for that. I was going to show off a little bit of the orchestration that's done in time for the production. But if you're curious, it's actually episode 9 of Gold Rush, where they played a violin while they were escaping, and it cross-cut between the violin playing and the escape. So custom music can really affect a story if you can pay for it that way. So that was my little example. Any questions about this kind of stuff? Open floor. Feel free. You don't have to type. You can talk. Not a one?
That's bad.
Or we just covered all of them. But it's one of these things is always keeping an eye on your budget. The bigger and even if it's a small budget, sometimes you'll have to just do incidentals for free. Like sometimes people will act for free, and that becomes a 0 on your budget, and you just can kind of go from there. But every single production that I've done has progressively gotten larger in budgets based on just the success of the last one. You just kind of build from there. And one of the questions earlier is like, how do you know what to ask for? You ask for more as you continually improve, and you say, hey, they paid me X amount on this production. Would you be willing to match it? And usually, it's just like a job. They want a hiring pay history, just so they know how much they're willing to pay for you. Seth, you had one.
Yeah, I may have missed this on the spreadsheet, but I come from film production, and in film production you have a line producer who manages the budget. So would you hire someone specifically to manage the budget of an audio production, or would the producer do it themselves?
You can do both. I mean, I've had a line producer as well, who was not only handling the budget, but also handling a lot of the contract stuff as well, with because you have to deal with SAG contracts, signatory process, and if you have a producer who's like active on set, they sometimes don't have time to deal with the agents and such. So if you can do it, that's great.
Production assistant, I will hire somebody who has a business head, has real kind of good at keeping me to time, because that's very important during the recording. Like, she'll kind of say, like, this has got a wrap. We've got so-and-so in the green room. We've got to bring them in. And she'll also, on the script, put in the good takes. I'll say that one's good, and then she'll mark it. So that really, really helps time afterwards.
Yeah, I actually budget a script supervisor during all of the recording sessions, because that way you have somebody marking in the script, making sure you get all your dialogue, all your lines, and also when we record to time code. So they actually mark the time code, yeah.
Yeah.
Because missing lines, that can be costly.
So it just kind of depends on the size of the budget, whether to bring in extra people to delegate some of the tasks just
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah, it's essentially the same way. Like paying for a script supervisor to make sure you don't miss any dialogue when you're dealing with high-end talent that will not come back for pickups, invaluable, because then you make sure you have all the material you need. Even some of the incidentals, like sometimes there'll be a chuckle or a laugh or something in between the dialogue that might be missed unless someone's actually paying attention.
Where do you find the script supervisors? Is that a job?
Yeah, it's usually my editors. The editors that are coming on to edit the project, I bring them on as script supervisors so that they're on set marking the scripts and making sure they have all the material. So then when they go back to edit, they're familiar with it as well.
And
It's some
people that edit voice, because you separate the voice people from the
Yeah, so also that way they're familiar with it. Also, they do the same thing in sort of the film industry, where the editor is also sometimes involved with the script supervising. That way, they're on set saying, "Oh, did we get this shot?" So that when they get back to the editing bay, they know that they're not missing something there.
Casey, I got a question. Do you use a production payroll company?
Sometimes, yes. So you can use like I have ADP for dealing with payroll and such. So you have to calculate that in sometimes, depending on some of the incidentals. There is, depending on where you're at, their work for hire. You can do loan outs and things like that, where you can pay someone directly and 1099 them. It all really depends on the production itself. And I have to always say with the asterisk, check your local hiring practices and restrictions on that, because every state is different. And audio productions are actually different in California as well. Any last questions before we call it a day?
I have one more for Jude. Jude, do you have is it a buyout contract that you have with your actors, or do you pay residuals over there?
They get a little bit, no, what you're paying for is one broadcast and one repeat. So that's in their contract. If they ever, and the BBC is so stingy, if they were to ever do a third, you'd have to go back and pay the actors the 1/3 of what they got initially.
Oh, wow. That's not the same with a lot of, like Audible does buyouts, where because they obviously are it's there indefinitely. And to do residuals on that, they're not interested in it.
I mean, Audible buy out everything, right?
Yeah.
They buy the IP of the script.
They do that. They'll buy out the music. Everything has to be buyout. That way they don't have to worry about the residuals afterwards. And it's the same way with other productions as well, who are strictly in the podcast sector. Buyouts are easier if you can do them.
I mean, for me, after 10 years, I can send the script, but no, not the script, the audio production anywhere.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everybody. This was a great conversation, and I hope we answered all your questions. If you have any follow-ups, you can always reach out to me. My contact's through waylandproductions.com. And to plug some stuff that's coming up, if you're on Audible, Motel Evil just came out last month. And next month I have something coming out called The Division Hearts on Fire with Audible. And they're pretty amazing productions. So check them out if you are looking for something to listen to. Jude, do you have anything to plug?
Yeah. If you're interested in learning more about this kind of stuff, and there's so much more we could say, get in touch with me. The website is judekampfner.com. And I do sessions of 1 hour of coaching over phone or Zoom.
And I'll throw on one asterisk as well. If I did a production manual called Bombs Always Beep. If you're interested, that covers a lot of different production aspects. That was in our store last year. But if you go to bombsalwaysbeep.com, it's all available there. That covers various aspects of production, including budgeting, casting, all that fun stuff.
Wow,
So.
that's for a freebie, right?
It's $20.
Okay.
So but it's a big old book. So it's like 300 pages or so. So it's not a little pamphlet. It covers a lot.
It's a good deal.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for coming, and we'll hear from you soon.
Namaste.
Oh, Mike's got it. Thank you, Mike.
Wow.
I appreciate that.
Very good. Bye.
Cheers, everybody. Have a great weekend.